I want to talk to you today about how APIs are really allowing a lot of developers to build disruptive technologies in the game industry and really across all industries. I work here at Vendasta, and we get to use a lot of cool technologies like Google App Engine, GitHub, and we're using a lot of APIs ourselves. And we build disruptive technology, but I see a lot of parallels with what's happening in the game industry over the last 10, 20 years, and I just want to discuss some of those things. So, does this have an on and off switch? It is not on. There we go. Perfect. So, I just want to give a little background about myself. I graduated from the Computer Systems Technology program at SIAST, now known as Sask Polytech. I work here at Vendasta as a software engineer for about 2.5 years now, I guess. My probably one of the biggest passions in my life is video games, though. I'm dedicated gamer. I play a lot of games. I've dabbled in some video game development myself. I've taken some online courses. I've done game jam events. I watch a lot of games, both competitive and just regular Twitch streams as well. And I've tried streaming myself. I've probably put in a couple hundred hours of Twitch TV streaming myself, as well as I've created a website called CSGOBinds.com, and I'll give you some more details about that later. So this entire talk really comes up because creating video games is really, really, really hard. To create a game, I mean, other than in really rare circumstances, it usually takes an entire team of people. A lot of talented people are involved in this process. Everyone from coders, designers, level designers, audio engineers. You have a whole slew of people that get involved to create these video games. And after all that time and energy has gone into creating a video game, really the success of said game depends on having people that want to play it, right? There's no point in making a game if no one's going to play it. APIs, though, allow the community to really create content or give new experiences to players, and it helps prolong lives of games, give them extra replay value, and even increase the sales for the original game as well. It's really a win-win for players and developers both. I think everyone kind of wins with APIs. So I want to discuss some success stories. But some of you are probably asking, what is an API? Like, I don't want to lose anyone here. So let's talk about that. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it basically allows, or it's the way that one computer system or piece of software will communicate with another computer system. Much like a user interface, maybe Windows or a browser allows a human to communicate with the computer itself. So an API is essentially just used by applications to build features and utilize services that are already built in other applications. A lot of these APIs are made accessible through things called software development kits, or SDKs. These SDKs are a set of tools that allow developers to utilize the APIs in usually easier ways than just raw accessing the APIs themselves. And they might not even be for coders either. They could actually be graphical user interfaces. Maybe you have a level designer where you're just dragging and dropping pieces to create your own levels, or there's even games like RPG Maker that allow players of the RPG Maker game to actually make games of their own using a graphical user interface as well. These SDKs are often created and distributed by the original game developers to encourage those contributions and development. One of the biggest PC game developers and publishers, Valve, has a whole slew of SDKs available on their public GitHub page, as well as extensive documentation for how to create a mod or a modification for existing Valve games, and also just what kind of functions are available in their APIs. So I mentioned mods or modifications. There's really a whole bunch of different kinds of mods in the game industry, but I want to touch on a couple of them here. One type of mod, probably the most common that you'll see, is a total conversion. It's when a developer takes an existing game and builds a brand new game using some of the core infrastructure available from the first game, usually just the engine. The other developer has replaced all of the game mechanics and artistic assets, so new sounds, new graphics, but maybe using the same physics engines or graphics engines. The mods that are created for these games don't even have to be in the same genre of the original game. You can get sports games created with the engines of action games and all kinds of different combinations like that. They're often created by the fans and they're distributed for free in most cases. A lot of these mods actually can't be charged for playing them because they involve using code or licensed materials from the original game, so they're distributed for free. And because of that, it also usually requires the players to have the base game installed for these total conversions. I want to talk about CounterStrike for a little bit. People are laughing because they know me and they know I love CounterStrike. So this is by far my favorite game of all time, and I think that's true for a lot of people who play video games, especially the FPS genre. CounterStrike was created in 1999, but let me take a step back here because I need to tell a little bit of an origin story here for you to get the full picture. Half-Life was released in 1998 by Valve Software. It was actually their first game they ever published. They didn't actually publish it themselves, but it was their first game they ever developed. And it was a single-player sci-fi shooter. There was aliens and missions, and it was a really great game, actually one of the best games of all time, in my opinion. And it itself was actually a mod of the Quake game. It used the Quake engine and was licensed by ID Software, the same people that make Doom and that kind of thing. Valve paid ID Software to use their engine to make Half-Life. CounterStrike came a year later, and it was made by two guys in their dorm room while they were attending university, and it was just because they loved Half-Life so much, but they had an idea, and Min Lee and Jess Cliff decided, we want to build a game, and we want to use Half-Life as the base for that game. This idea was CounterStrike. It's a completely different game than Half-Life. It's a military, team-based, tactical shooter. There's an economy built into the game. You have to purchase weapons and this kind of thing. It was really different, but from these screenshots, I don't know how clear they come through on the slides there, but you can see they're very different games, even just in their aesthetics. It became like instantly popular as soon as it was released. Everyone was playing it around the world, well, at least everyone that owned Half-Life, and they were releasing updates on a monthly basis, and the popularity was growing. By the fourth update they released, Valve actually started helping them build this game. Valve was contributing back to these two guys that were building this game, and eventually in 2000, a year after they first released it, Valve bought the rights to Counter-Strike, brought it in-house to themselves, and hired Min Lee and Jess Cliff to come work in Washington at the Valve headquarters. So now Valve owns the rights to Counter-Strike. They've released two other iterations since then, Counter-Strike Source in 2004 and Counter-Strike Global Offensive, commonly known as CSGO, in 2012. And as you can see from some of these figures, they're very successful. CSGO alone has sold 28 million copies since its release, and we have 60 million total for the franchise since 1999. So those are pretty astounding figures. In the last 2 weeks, as of today, there's been 10 million players online actively playing CSGO on Valve servers. Also earlier this year, we broke the Twitch record for highest concurrent viewership for the grand final that happened on a major tournament. So this is just a screenshot of what Counter-Strike Global Offensive looks like in-game when you're playing it. You can see it's your typical first-person shooter, some military stuff going on. This is a screenshot of the Valve Major in 2015. This wasn't even the most recent one. This was 2 years ago, and you can see we're filling arena stadiums. People want to watch this. It's being streamed on Twitch, so you have online viewership as well, but I mean, this rivals any regular sports event you might see in an arena, right? want to mention a couple other notable total conversion mods. DayZ is a really popular one. You may have heard of it. It's a zombie survival game made off of a military tactical shooter called Arma. We went back 2 slides. There we go. Dota actually was a really interesting mod when it was first created. It actually defined a brand new genre that never even existed before. It's the MOBA. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so it's a brand new genre that never even existed. And there's a lot of other games that are now in that genre, but it was the first actually. Desert Combat is another one of my favorites. It's another example where the team that developed Desert Combat, which is a mod for Battlefield 1942, was eventually hired by EA and contributed to building Battlefield 2, the next iteration of that game. So just like CounterStrike, the people that made a mod eventually got employed by the base game's creators. So those are some pretty cool success stories. Another type of mods are add-ons. Now these are a little bit smaller, usually in terms of mods, relative sizing, and they involve typically less effort than creating a total conversion. They're not totally overhauling the game or creating brand new game mechanics usually. They're just adding extra content or features or maybe changing the game's behavior slightly. They usually don't require you to change any of the original game's code. You're just installing extra content into your other game. And often game developers are actually creating their games with add-ons in mind. They have APIs or other ways that developers can allow players to easily install and load or disable various add-ons. Add-ons themselves can actually be created with the sole purpose of just providing new APIs for other add-on developers. So you kind of end up with this Frankenstein game where you install an add-on to install more add-ons on top of that. An example of that is actually the Source VentScripts Python package for CounterStrike Source and other Source games. Normally, if you want to make a mod for CounterStrike games, you have to write C++ and you have to work with the really low-level framework, the SDK that Valve gives you. But maybe you just want to write some Python. It's a little bit easier of a language to pick up and do some cool stuff with. So the Source VentScripts Python was created to give you a Python API instead of a C++ API in order to allow developers to create mods for their favorite game. One of those mods created using the Python API was Gun Game, a very popular add-on for Counter-Strike that changes the entire way Counter-Strike is played. It's a totally new game mode. Another really great example is Minecraft Forge. It's one of the examples of where it's an add-on that adds more APIs for other add-ons to be loaded by the player, since Minecraft doesn't offer that functionality built into it. So I want to move on to web APIs. I get really excited about web APIs because they're something I deal with on a day-to-day basis in my job, but they're also prominent in the game industry as well. Web API is essentially an online service or set of resources that allow one application to access another application's services or functions or whatever remotely over the internet, right? So it usually involves some client software calling a remote server and invoking some remote code on that server. Game developers can create these web APIs for other developers to be able to interface with their games and their systems and build cool other games or tools that leverage systems that they've written. A really good example of this is Blizzard's web API. They have web APIs for, I believe, all of their games, World of Warcraft, StarCraft. The picture on the right-hand side there you're seeing is an example of the StarCraft 2 Get Match History web API, where you can look up players' match histories for their StarCraft games, which is pretty cool. Speaking of web APIs, I want to talk about another success story that's really, in my mind, one of the kind of definitive examples of disruptive technology. CSGO Lounge was a website that was founded in 2013, a year after CounterStrike Global Offensive was released. In 2013, Valve decided to add cosmetic items to the CounterStrike game. They didn't change the gameplay at all, but there were things like gun skins, made your guns look different, or stickers that you could attach to your equipment. Like I said, they didn't affect the game at all, but they gave players a different cosmetic aesthetic in their game. And because they were rare, they had a monetary value. You could sell and trade them on the Steam market, which isn't directly aligned with real world money, but you could use Steam money to buy other Steam games, so they had some value associated with them. CSGOLounge.com decided to leverage a whole bunch of Steam's APIs in a new way that no one had really thought of doing before, and it kind of changed the whole way that these APIs were thought of. It was a fan-created site. That's important to note. This is not something that Valve developed or anything. They just provided the APIs for their game systems. A team of fans created the CSGOLounge.com website, and they allowed you to log in with your Steam username and password, so they didn't have to store any of their own account information. Once you're logged in, the website allowed you to trade these in-game items with other players that were also logged in, so you could facilitate trades. You could also bet on professional matches. So as matches were happening in the professional scene, those tournaments I was showing you before, you could bet on these matches and use the in-game items as a currency for betting. Now, they had no real world value associated with them, but in the community, they did have a value. You know, this gun skin costs $5 on Steam, and this sticker costs $2. So you could place bets using these items on this website. The way they did that was they actually created a set of thousands and thousands of automated web bots that were actually interacting with the Steam Trade API, basically imitating real users, facilitating these trades between players and these betting pots being distributed properly to the winning players who placed the bets. They mostly received a lot of revenue through their ads, and it's never been reported how much revenue CSGO Lounge got from ads, but they also got a lot of money from taking a small percentage. I believe it was 4% of every pot for all of the bets. This is a screenshot of what their website looked like. You can see that on the left-hand side there's users trying to initiate trades with other users, and on the right-hand side there's a list of upcoming professional matches and their betting odds, and you could click into those and place items for betting on this website. The success of this website is almost a little bit hard to believe. These numbers, there's no typos on this slide, I just want to be clear on that. The in-game items, they're commonly referred to as skins. There was almost like a black market that was created with these skins. It led to people using them not only as betting currency, but also currency on other websites. I could buy a dedicated server to play games on with CSGO in-game skins. It was kind of ridiculous, actually. I didn't need a PayPal account. I just needed, you know, an AK with a flame on it, and that's pretty much it. It didn't make a lot of sense, but it was happening, and it was growing pretty widespread. These were being highly promoted on websites. Any CounterStrike website you went to had ads for these websites. There's gambling websites as well, and they were being advertised on the major streams. So as you were watching a professional match, you were getting an ad saying, "Go visit CSGO Lounge and place your bets on this match." Between 2013 and 2016, CSGO viewership had spiked pretty drastically in terms of increased viewership. It was on the rise. Practically every event had more viewers than the last, and a lot of people attribute this to the rise of CSGO gambling. In 2015, it was actually interesting because Valve decided to partner with the owners of CSGO Lounge to investigate a match-fixing scandal where professional players were accused of throwing a match because they bet items that had this value so that they could get huge pots, right? If they had low odds, they'd place bets for the other team and then purposely lose. Valve and CSGO together investigated this, found 6 guilty parties, and banned them for life from ever competing in another Valve-sponsored event. In 2016, so last year alone, CSGO Lounge, along with a few other websites, were estimated getting $5 billion in revenue, not in ad revenue, just in in-game item revenue. So I said it wasn't directly, you can't just pull that money out of Steam, but you could do things like PayPal transactions to attempt to get this money, and CSGO Lounge earned $5 billion of that. Just for context, I guess, Netflix last year in 2016 only made $6 billion. Activision Blizzard, the company responsible for Call of Duty, StarCraft, World of Warcraft, and the Guitar Hero series, only made $2 billion in revenue last year. So these are huge numbers. Well, as I said, it was a really disruptive technology. A lot of people weren't really sure what to make of all of this going on and happening so quickly. It was really, like I said, an unregulated black market. A lot of things were happening quickly, and Valve just kind of turned a blind eye. They said, you know, you're not really breaking any rules of our API usage. Your players are happy. It's increasing our viewership. It's bringing popularity to the game. We're just going to kind of ignore it, assuming no one's doing any really sketchy things. Of course, the match fixing last year kind of caused some concern. There's also a lot of people upset with the possibility of underage gambling through these sites, because there's really no, you know, legal thing saying you have to be 18 to use these sites or anything like that. In February last year, February 2016, the Washington State Gambling Commission, which is the same state where Valve is headquartered in Washington, they issued them a warning saying, you better stop these websites, and Valve responded to them basically saying, they're not our websites, we're just giving them the API, they can do whatever they want. They didn't do anything about it. Later in the year, in October, WSGC said, no, we're going to hold you accountable for what happens in this kind of, you know, booming industry. You better shut down these websites. We don't want you facilitating this. And they finally complied by issuing a whole bunch of cease and desist letters. I think it was over like 60 that they sent to the most popular websites. The problem is these APIs haven't stopped being available. Any developer can still use these same APIs that were used to create this site, which means that these sites still exist even though the major ones shut down. And the number of bets that are happening on matches has significantly decreased. The site still exists and new ones are popping up all the time. So back to, you know, different types of APIs in games. There's also an interface known as a console. It allows you to issue commands to your game, maybe write some scripts for your game. There, it updated. Yeah, you basically get a console, and it allows maybe more advanced players to control certain game aspects, maybe change their configuration, maybe do certain in-game events, and it's all through, you know, commands like you see at the bottom there. And I have a link to an example set of configs that a certain pro player suggests using. It's pretty cool. That's a screenshot of the console in CounterStrike Go developed by Valve. Now, this is something the game developer actually has to consciously put into their game. They don't just get this for free, but they've developed this console for players to use and input commands. It's really cool. In CSGO, when you want to buy weapons, which pretty much happens every 2 minutes a new round starts, you need to purchase your loadout. Maybe you want a rifle, a sidearm, maybe some armor, and maybe a few grenades or something like that. Normally when you're playing the game, you would use these radial menus with your mouse and click through some awkward menus and pick your loadouts. It usually takes a few seconds. It's not too cumbersome, but it's certainly not ideal either. Luckily, Valve has given you a console interface for buying these very quickly. You can see at the bottom there, I have a command that binds the F1 key in-game to buy a series of equipment all at once, which is pretty cool. It allows you to just hit one button and you're off. And that API is what spawned csgobinds.com, my website. So this is just the homepage of it. It was a web app that I created in 2014, so it's several years old now. I've issued several iterations of it, or released several iterations of it. It allows players to essentially create those binds, the one you saw at the bottom of this screen. It allows you to create a series of those binds through a graphical user interface, something that's a little bit easier for players to do than just, you know, edit arbitrary text files. So the inspiration came from a personal need, which is where most innovations come from, I believe, right? I was tired of typing out these bind commands myself, so I thought there has to be a tool. Unfortunately, there wasn't, so I decided to build one. I used some web APIs to load the data for what guns are available in the game, what keys are on your keyboard that you're able to bind. And this is kind of what the first iteration turned out to look like. You can see here that it's called the Xbinds Generator. It allows you to select which key you want to bind to. It's a pretty sweet drop-down menu where you can search all the keys on the keyboard. After you've picked a key to bind, well, maybe you actually want to just press any key. So you can push that button and push any key on your keyboard and it'll pick the key for you automatically. Then you go ahead and you pick all of your equipment. So here I want a Desert Eagle as a secondary sidearm. I grab some grenades or something, and I go ahead and I click the Generate Bind button, and that gives me a single bind command that I can enter in my CounterStrike Global Offensive console in-game that'll make the F2 button by whatever equipment I've configured. That was really the first iteration, just get a simple interface for building one bind. But that wasn't my goal. My goal was to allow you to bind all of the keys on your keyboard at once, if you so chose. So as a player, I always used my number pad. It wasn't used in the game for anything else. So the number pad that's usually on the side of your keyboards, I decided to bind all of those keys to different weapon configurations, and I decided to put that into the software. So you can see here there's a series of buttons on the website that allows you to, or they line up with the keys on your keyboard. Once you click one of those, you get a modal window that has a lot of the same features as we just saw in the single bind generator. Lets you pick your equipment, your weapons. Once you've done that, the interface gives you a nice indication that you have something bound to that key, and you can go ahead and continue binding as many keys as you want, picking more equipment. And as you're binding all those keys, you might say, oh, I don't just want numeric keys, I want some function keys. Throw some of those in there. You eventually click the Generate Binds button, and it gives you a whole set of these binds. So these commands you would enter into your console, and it would save to your game config files so that you could push any of these buttons and you'd immediately get that loadout that you've configured on the website. You can see here it also has a Load Binds button in the top right corner where you can load presets that I, as the web developer, have configured for people, just maybe popular sets. There's a Save button in the bottom right, the green one there. It lets you save any of your binds you like. And of course, the Load button would allow you to load those too once you've saved some. The technology I'm using for this website, I've made it open source under the MIT license. Basically means anyone could copy this code, host it themselves, and make money on it if they wanted. I left it really open for anyone to get value out of. I'm hosting it on GitHub. Both the source code is versioned in GitHub, but I'm also using GitHub's cool Pages feature, which allows me to host this website for free on the internet. I don't pay any server costs for hosting this. I built it with AngularJS 1.x for anyone interested. I use Bootstrap CSS for the styling, and it's pure HTML5 other than that. The important thing to note here is there's really no server-side component to this application. The entire application gets downloaded into the user's browser, and it's all run client-side. And all the tests are run through Jenkins CI for free. So I want to talk about the success of this website. Now, I built this just because I wanted a tool to build my own binds, and I thought it'd be cool to share it with the world and put it on the net, but I really had no expectation of this gaining any traction or popularity. I didn't know if anyone would have value for this tool, but 3 years later, I've been shown otherwise, and we can see from some of these stats here that over 1.5 million people have used it since I released it. They account for 2.3 million sessions and 3.2 million page views. That's pretty impressive. The average time spent on the site in a single session is 3.5 minutes. That means in total, people have spent 5,500 days total time using my website. It's been shared on Reddit and in YouTube videos by a lot of prominent people in the community. Lots of imitations have spawned up. People have either tried to copy the idea and build their own website, or some people have forked my code since it's open source and tweaked it either styling or whatever and hosted on their website. I just view that as flattery, to be perfectly honest. Like, that's what I want to encourage, right, is people to find this useful and do something cool with it themselves. And my email inbox is constantly flooded with people in the community, especially the gambling sites, saying, hey, we want to advertise on your site, because they know what kind of traffic it's generating as well. I got 63 stars on GitHub, and that unfortunately made me the #1 JavaScript developer in Saskatoon for like almost 2 years, according to Git Awards. Now, people are laughing, and that's deservingly so, because I am not a good JavaScript developer. I actually started this website so I could get better at front-end development. I kind of suck at it, to be perfectly honest. So it was really ironic that I was the #1 JavaScript developer in Saskatoon. This is my Google Analytics dashboard showing you just the traffic from January 1st this year. The graph at the top is on a daily increment. So you can see I'm averaging about 4,000, maybe a little under, sessions per day. I have a really tiny bounce rate of just over 5%, which is, for any marketing people, like pretty outstanding. Yeah, that's about it. So in conclusion, I just want to say that, APIs really enable awesome. Whether you're a player that really enjoys games, you can get a lot more value out of community-generated content that is leveraging existing APIs to build new games, new features, new modes. And if you're a developer, you can actually increase the potential of success for your game by providing these APIs and these consoles, because it encourages creativity and collaboration inside of your community. And people like me will take an idea and run with it if you give us the tools to do so. So, it's just overall a good thing, I think.